Hi, everybody, and welcome to Lowdown on Low Code. This is episode 11. This is an episode we've been particularly excited about recording. As you can see, I'm here with John Rymer today. John Rymer and I will be co-hosting Kramer Reeves. So John and Kramer and I have a deep and wonderful history together. We've known each other for a long time. So long that we all showed up wearing San Francisco Giants gear without coordinating it with each other. So, Kramer, I'm going to let you go into your background a little bit, but, just to hit the highlights, deep experience in content management, deep experience with AIM, goes back to WebSphere, IBM's attempt to build a workflow system on WebSphere, involved with Lombardi, involved with operational decision management, the ODM decisioning platform, ran product management for Lotus Notes for a while, and most recently has been with Work-Relay. So an amazing past. So at this point, I want to just turn it over, let John take over for a few minutes, and dive right into it.
Thank you, Rob. Hey, Kramer, welcome. Great to have you.
Thanks, John.
As Rob mentioned, you've got a very long background in process automation, low code, and low code generally. And I want to just highlight that there's a little branch of low code and citizen development for business rules management. IBM bought iLog and then developed it into the operational decision management product. And that part of the thread there was experts in policies and procedures and protocols in insurance, et cetera, and finance, et cetera, could actually manage software that automated, rule-based processes. So you got, that's a really important thread here. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this. You going back to Lotus Notes, and what kind of your origin story is to then set you off on this journey that's been going on for quite a long time and continues.
Well, thanks, John, and thanks, Rob. And it's a pleasure to be here today. I've been listening to the podcast for the last few months, and I really enjoy that this is being produced and shared. I think the market can benefit so much from not only hearing from you guys, but all your guests, the vendors, the thought leaders, and the insights. So kudos for launching this and having your chapter 2 after the so-called retirement. And before I jump into my story, I'll just share with the audience. Of course, we have our Giants hat on. We have a connection to the Bay Area, but we also hit on running and skiing and Taylor Swift's new album that just dropped last night. So a lot of topics we'll say for another time. But back to my background, and it actually does go long before Lotus Notes. I actually arrived at the Notes Domino world later in my career. I started out as a civil engineer and got into computer-aided design and essentially model-driven software in the engineering space in the early 90s. I was fortunate to get hired by IBM out of business school into the WebSphere world. And although WebSphere was an application server, they were building up their process layer. And we acquired 2 companies in the early 2000s. Both were early versions of low code, model-driven process automation, a company called Crossworlds, and another company called Holosophics. They formed the creation of the first BPM suite that was rebranded the WebSphere Process Server with modeling, monitoring, execution. It was very sophisticated, didn't quite hit some of the truer accelerated needs of the market. And so IBM ultimately purchased Lombardi. And with Lombardi, we bought a market leader in the arena. In parallel, we also bought FileNet, which brought in BPM and content management capabilities. There's an interesting saga about those being in different divisions and trying to address the market separately. I will save that for an offline conversation, but it was exciting as the head of marketing for both of those areas to try to bring two products to market in virtually the same space. We also bought iLog, and as John was mentioning, this was a wonderful acquisition, as were the others as well. But this was one where we had partnered in the decision management, previously the business rules space, and now the evolving decision management arena. And we introduced a full automation suite shortly thereafter in 2011 and 12. I was fortunate then to be asked to come over to the collaboration division and reinvent the Lotus Notes space, and had a nice stint in another essentially low-code environment as we explored different types of collaboration evolutions and the like. Ultimately, we positioned that for a spinoff. HCL bought that division for most of those assets for about $1.7 billion. And I was recruited to go to back into the automation space, went to work for Sapiens Decision. Sapiens was led by a gentleman named Larry Goldberg, who wrote the book, The Decision Model. So I was able to learn a tremendous amount from him. Another sort of step forward in making business rules, business policies, and protocols more accessible to the business user through a model-driven, essentially no-code environment. And eventually I went back to IBM, and we scaled up from a small division. We were now up to almost 2.5 billion, and I was able to lead marketing through that scale up and another 4 years. Eventually, I got recruited out of IBM to go work in the Salesforce ecosystem, and that's where I've been the last 3 years. And it's been really interesting. We'll get into Work-Relay. The founder of Work-Relay, a guy named John Saper, 9-time author, and he is a student of the Ellie Goldratt school of critical chain and theory of constraints. And so what Work-Relay did was to bring a lot of those principles of constraint programming, critical chain project management, and the whole theory into a process-driven no-code environment. And while probably that sounds really complex, the end result is a very elegant and user-friendly way to manage complex environments. And in fact, we were acquired about 1.5 years ago by Neostella. So I'll take off my Giants hat, and I'll put on my Neostella hat for a second, just to, as a marketer, to get the proper branding. And we are a global company with operations in all continents and deployments in a lot of different industries. We can go into a little bit more about that, but model driven almost since 2000 or so in the enterprise space. And John, sort of like you and your background, it was more application development in the Java platform of WebSphere that then was augmented with the acquisitions of Lombardi and iLog to really move into more of that process automation space that Rob ended up covering for a long time, and more into the low code over the last 10 years or so.
Kramer, let's dig into that a little bit, because one of the things we really want to get in front of our audience is that there's a lot of different solutions in this space, and it's oftentimes very difficult to figure out what's exactly right for my organization. We had Merv Adrian on, and we talked about the evaluative research, and one of the issues we kind of took with the evaluative research, of which Murph and I had done a ton, is, okay, you get a graphic and the graphic says, here's the winner, right? Here's the best one. It's not really how you should go about choosing a product. You work for IBM. IBM checks a lot of boxes, right? It's content, it's workflow, it's decision management, it's RPA, it's process mining now. Really, really robust offering. And then you go to work for Work-Relay, who's really disruptive, right? And is actually having a fair amount of success against some of these Goliaths. What is the situation that a Work-Relay account exec walks in and says, boy, oh boy, this is my deal. This is what we are designed to do. What does that look like?
Yeah. So thanks for the shout out there, because we are disruptive. We are we have been flying under the radar. And in fact, just one more point on the history here, I was originally introduced to Work-Relay because they knocked us out of a global 100. They knocked IBM out of a global 100 company in 2017 and 18. And I said, who are these little guys? Was introduced to the founder, and we built up a relationship over the next few years before I was able to join them. So for a small company to knock out IBM, there's got to be something special there. And I'll also go back to I love the waves and the quadrants and the evaluations, because you get to see how the vendors are looking at a space and how the analysts are interpreting it. In the last Forrester Wave for low-code platforms, John Bratisevich says that most of the vendors provide general purpose functionality, but the market should really choose a platform that maps to the most significant, and I'm quoting here, significant intended use case. And I think that comes right back to your question, Rob. We are, yes, we're a platform. You can handle a lot of use cases, but our best use case is we're a Salesforce no-code app. So first off, you're in a Salesforce environment. And where Salesforce takes the order, their sweet spot is in the CRM, taking the order, we fulfill it. So from the order to the cash, from build the product to delivery, from the service definition to provisioning. And the characteristics of those use cases are very specific for us. They're complex by nature. So there's usually a lot of steps involved. There's a lot of participants. So think about our swim lanes, not just teams, but individuals. So a lot of steps, a lot of participants, complex sequencing, parallel activities, lots of branches, probably some sub processes and like. And then the critical thing that we have found and what we build in our environment that a lot of customers don't think about is the element of time. And in our classic process world, time is much more of an abstract element. And what we've done is we've made it a first-class citizen. It's defined at the model. And now your work is trackable and all kinds of good things happen. So we call it a time-critical process that's obviously repetitive and complex, and that's what we look for. And I can give you a few examples, but
yeah. You mentioned sequencing as part of the environment. Is raising time as an element in development. I imagine is really critical, because some sequencing is going to be really, really precise. It has to be really, really precise. Is that the right way to think about it?
It is, John. And it's interesting that we struggle and sometimes walk away from opportunities if the client or the prospect is not committed to defining work in its granular unit. And if you define the work in your granular unit, then you can now assign, well, how much time should that unit of work take to complete? Is it a day, a week, a month? Is it an hour, a second, a millisecond? And we can define that and we guide. I liked some of your discussions in the previous podcasts about adoption and how do you scale. our clients that scale embrace the approach of breaking down your work into units of work, doing the sequence, the resourcing, assignment, and most importantly, defining the time. And those are the ones that all of a sudden, that activates Relay. You talk about a no-code environment. We do have a model that's essentially the origins of no code, I think, to a certain degree. But we also have a wizard-driven, super easy, business-friendly approach, and it'll force the users to define the time for each of their units of work. That activates Work Relay, and now you have a solution to manage the real complex work that and after that, all these insights can appear. How long is it taking? What's your buffer for the entire process? And this gets into buffer management, which then leads into predictive and prescriptive analytics and some of the fun stuff that maybe we can get time to talk about. That opens up the AI models and some of those things. So that element of time is so key for us.
We're definitely going to hit on the AI piece before we leave, Kramer. But the other piece that I think our audience that the market struggles with is not just the small management of time, but the long running processes, maintaining state over these longer running processes. And I'd be interested in sort of your take with this focus on time, which I think is very unique. How does that play out in my long running processes, which are such a nightmare from so many organizations?
Well, yeah, and I'll give you an example of another large Fortune 100. This is a company where we are fortunate to, we're competing against Pega, and Pega is a wonderful platform, very formidable. The challenge was it was taking the client 120 days to make a change to a product and have it available in the market. And they wanted to shrink that. Their goal was to shrink it to 5 days. And POCs, bake off, and there were so many products in the company that it had to be business user friendly, a no code approach to how you do this. And there's enough tweaks that it couldn't be one process for 10,000 products. There had to be flexibility with each of the divisions and each of the brand managers to be able to adjust the process based on their suppliers, their legal team, their branding and marketing and so forth, and all of that. We won, and we were able to prove that we could get it down to 12 days. We haven't hit 5 days, and it's interesting. We looked at the bottleneck, and the bottleneck is legal, so we can't make the lawyers go any faster. But the
first thing we do is kill all the lawyers.
That's an option.
Well,
so
when we come up with a process solution that can deal with human weight states, that'll be fabulous. Maybe that gets into our AI conversation. But yeah, we wait for lawyers. That's a perfectly reasonable thing, and certainly not your fault.
We're looking at the long running process. This one, happened to be 120 days. We're shrinking out to 12 days, but it's a process that goes indefinitely because they're constantly, whether or not it's a seasonal adjustment, a holiday adjustment, a regulatory adjustment, the product packaging, the product material, things get changed all the time. And so now, the backbone of, our environment here is in applications. Essentially, you've got data and you've got processing, you've got a user experience. That process, defining that process, if it's important. I think, John, you mentioned talking about mission critical operations in one of the podcasts. If it's important, you're gonna want to develop a process so you can scale and you can have governance, and that's what we bring in these long running processes, and you add in these elements of time and granular units of work that we then manage in a somewhat of like a project management environment. But I'll come back to your question, Rob. It's no different for us with short running processes or long running processes. The approach is still the same. And back to the theme here, it's no code. That's the key. Is like, we're working in the Salesforce environment, and we want to avoid Apex coding. We don't want our users to have to get into Apex. And so that's, we have a model, we have wizards, and it's drag and drop on form creation and things like that. So
I'm curious, Kramer, so you 120 days down to 12 is pretty impressive. Even if you didn't get to 5, I suspect maybe there's hope for that. But how important was it to bring business people into the process to get that efficiency gain, that massive efficiency gain? Maybe talk a little bit about the importance of bringing business folks in and what they actually could do to achieve that gain.
Well, I like the term, Rob, and I think it might have even been your title back in some of your original Notes days, business developer. I think a lot of times we think about that as a biz dev sales role, but there's that kind of in the bridge of technology and operations and business people. It's a great role. I think we've called on process analysts or business analysts that are process experts, and there's the users, and there's some technical people in between. Bringing some of those concepts together, where you don't need a classic process analyst or business analyst who's a process expert, but you can let the business person run a wizard and define a process, even a complex one that's long-lived, long-running. It opens up a degree of iteration, experimentation, and insight to the business teams that they had been dependent on for their business analysts to lead for so many, essentially decades. So it's vitally important, John, to answer your question, to have the business at the table. And there's still a degree of ratio of a few business analysts or power users to hundreds, if not thousands, or tens of thousands of business users, and who has keys to the kingdom. Where does the governance, where's that kind of line in that spectrum of who can actually create and run a process in a solution? And I think where that line was way over here for multiple decades, it's shifting more and more and more over here. You think about, I think one of your examples on OutSystems and Mendix and, some of these vendors, and now, with Microsoft, even we think about with what's happened in Power Automate. I mean, they were even essentially in the discussion a few years ago, compared to where they are now. All of that, I think that line is moving more and more so that the business users are becoming more and more comfortable, but they are absolutely vital to, it all goes back to a digital transformation project. Hey, come in, got a problem. Can your tech help us? Yes, it can. But you have to have your participants and your stakeholders bought in. And if you're not, no amount of great, simple, easy to use technology is gonna help. So absolutely.
And it sounds like what you're saying is not only bought in, but actually participating in creating the automation.
Let's press on that a little bit. So, by the way, we try to be very modest here. We're the modest analyst guys. But John and I did write that doc that said you better watch out for Power Automate in 2018, and it was a good call. Kramer, I want to pursue this a little further. Okay, so we've seen Work-Relay come in against Pega and IBM on really sophisticated mission critical projects, right? And that's a domain, right, that we recognize that's stuff that goes on over there. We've talked about the business developer role. How much does Work-Relay play in sort of the pervasive applications? You mentioned some of these things you can stand up very quickly through wizards, and because on one side of the continuum we've got the Pegas and the IBMs, maybe Camunda and Appian can play out there. On the other end, we've got the quick bases, the quick the KISS flows, the Nintexes, where we're almost getting into kind of getting rid of those microprocesses that are running on spreadsheets and email. Does Work-Relay play in this world, or are you sort of ensconced over there on the right?
Well, no, we definitely do. And I'll caveat that if the client is not a Salesforce customer, it's probably not a good fit for us. Because but I wanted to just I'm going to come back to your question here in just a second, but I want to come back to one of the key things that really makes the no-code world come alive for business users is the architecture and the ability to map to whatever data object that is required within the flow. And this is something that in Salesforce, to a certain degree, they can do that with Flow Designer and execute with flow orchestration, but something that we have come in and built, and similar to Alt and Mendix and others, an experience that camouflages all of that code, just that architecture, just like the model-driven process people did and the DPA folks did, the no-code, low-code places are doing it, environments are doing it as well. So while we have a sweet spot with Salesforce to camouflage that and to accelerate, I usually say coordinate and accelerate how orders get fulfilled and services get provisioned and things like that. We have lots and lots of use cases. We do lending, we're a lending environment for one of the largest financial services companies with assets under management over 2 trillion. We work in the telco space, and Work-Relay can handle essentially multi-order tracking and management when you're working. For example, this is a public reference, Unity Fiber. So they have 7 million strand miles of fiber throughout 35 states or so. They sell to municipalities and carriers, 25,000 mostly business customers, and it is a complex environment to install fiber and wireless and video and all of the different telco services. They do all of that, track it, manage it, coordinate it, all on Work-Relay. So I think there's a big spectrum where we can actually have an impact. But the sweet spot is right next to Salesforce. That's where we hit our home runs.
Well, Rob, I think one of the things we can observe about Salesforce is that they have very large customers.
Yeah, they do.
And then they have a lot of mid-sized customers as well. I mean, that was really where they started. So perhaps, I think what you're getting at, Rob, is the long tail.
The long tail, yeah.
And perhaps there's some of that. As well.
Yeah. Should we talk about AI?
Kramer, if I may, I have a soft spot in my heart for business rules. Spent a lot of years looking at that, studying that market. I really admired the work you did with Sapient, by the way. That was, as I've mentioned earlier, that is I view it as a subsegment of business developers, citizen developers, call it what you will. What did you learn? You looked at that so carefully. What did you learn about what was the art of the possible in that domain for business people that might be applicable more broadly to process and data collection and data analysis?
Well, John, you're right. And while the acquisition of iLog, I don't know if I would necessarily classify that as a um, as a modern day no code environment at the time. The rule space was at that point a beginning to simplify. The idea of extracting that logic out of the code and getting it into a manageable, separate environment where you can manipulate policies and procedures and different types of tiering models, especially in, you think about the classic, customer service tiering and how do you route a particular customer based on where their level is. That's a rule. It's a classic rule that iLog and, people like FICO and others and we're managing for lots and lots and lots of companies. The experience for the developer, however, was still somewhat in 7, 8, 9, 10. I believe that started to change around 12, 13, 14. The decision model came out, around that time from Larry and Barb and Holly, and they created a way to structure business logic in a very simple user interface. Sapiens codified that into a software environment. And now some of the most advanced, and it's interesting, Larry and Bart went after the more complex business rule environments to start. Some of the largest financial services, insurance, and government agencies. In fact, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare was a big client around the rollout of the Affordable Care Act. Fannie Mae as well, following the global financial crisis, had to really clean up how they manage loans and the secondary markets. All of that was driven by policies and rules, and there are lots of other examples. And these places needed a way to document and track, but more importantly, change logic as policies came out of Congress or policies came out of the risk compliance team or Treasury or whatever part of a bank was driving or an institution was driving change. And so that's where the sort of tipping point occurred in decision management when a business user who's familiar with policy can go in and make that policy change, that rule change, that procedure change that needs to be governed and tracked. Then that's when I think the market really expanded. That's when the acquisitions really occurred. And in a sense, it almost collapsed the market because it was so necessary and all the big vendors bought these companies. Sapiens is still independent at this point. I think they're such a successful company. They haven't sold out yet, but at some point all of these low code vendors, no code vendors needed to have the same ability to instantiate business rules and business logic in by a business person. And so it started there. And then now I think it's embraced and built in. And, we do that in our conditions and, different types of rule sets, and all of that is super easy and able to be handled by business users now. But that was the history as I saw it. But I'd love to hear what you thought. I mean, what did you see back then in those days that also were starting to simplify the business rule space?
Well, yeah, just real briefly, we also hit on this. We also began to recognize that change was the catalyst. And the company, the vendors actually really, they really worked hard on providing environments where business people could express, changes to rules, or even in some cases new rules, new environments. But to your point, the foundation had to be really had to be really, you needed a very, very, complete model in order to avoid, creating trouble, creating issues. Maybe that's a segue, Rob, into AI.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
the now famous example, unfortunate example of Air Canada, where they were victimized by a hallucination, told a customer about a discount program that didn't exist. So I guess we're very curious about how you see AI improving things here, but also about what are we going to have to know to avoid the risks of a hallucination that creates a bad business precedent or a bad business result.
Well, I'm going to put on one more hat here to answer that question. So here's my third and final hat of the day, and this is my running hat. This is a run that I do in North Carolina from UNC to Duke. It's a 30-mile run, but I bring it up only because world of ultra running, I'm an ultra runner. You don't get hallucinations at 30 miles, but you do get them at 100 miles. And I have had hallucinations when I'm running overnight runs at 100 miles. And while they're pretty innocuous and harmless in the woods at night, they feel pretty bad. Unlike, I think, these hallucinations that create havoc with clients, those probably those are much more serious. So that was my segue. Hopefully you got that. Okay, so we'll talk about AI here. First, to tie it back to the no code and low code world, I like the quote. There's a two-part quote I like that I use with clients. It goes back to Andreessen's quote from 2011. His quote was, "Software will eat the world," and he's right. You think about Netflix and Airbnb, and Amazon's a tech company essentially. Although I do think that they're doing some espionage that was just reported a couple days ago by the Wall Street Journal. So we got to watch out for Amazon. But then Stephen Cohen and Matthew Grenade from Cohen's the owner of the Mets, and Grenade and he have they have an equity fund called Point 72. It's like 20 billion. They wrote a story called "If Software Will Eat the World, Models Will Run the World." This was about 3 years ago. They wrote this, and it was really forecasting AI work that was beginning to become more consumable. I think Cohen's an investor in a lot of these firms, some of the startups. But Rob, you might remember when I came back to IBM in 2017. One of the things they asked me to do, I was working for Dion Newman, who was just one of the great marketers ever I've worked with. He's a senior exec at IBM. And he said, "We're going to launch Watson Assistant." And so we brought the first kind of personal assistant for businesses out to market. And while it was early and, complex and all that, a tremendous amount of technology was behind that. It did not particularly make a lot of traction. But you fast forward now, for like IBM many times is early to market in concepts and technology. And what in the heck just happened over the last year and a half? But it's all model based. It's very similar territory to the automation space, to the no-code space, and it's moving into a place. I was just looking at the Power Automate platform and seeing, how Copilot is right there. Just go for it. And so I think we're just at the beginning of this, and we're going to start seeing, much more integration and adoption of some of the simpler AI capabilities. We have We have an awesome data science team here. Maybe in a future podcast, I can share a little bit more about the direction we're going. But the big objective is to get to that prescriptive action assignment based on true insights that are derived from your executing workflow and process your process orchestration that's occurring. And this is another fun chapter that we're just about to start. And if you can do it all with no code, then that's great.
Kramer, we do love the Trask moments and going back to like where things started, even if they weren't kind of getting the traction we expected. So, do you recognize this? This is the U.S. patent that we got for the work that we were doing at that time, early stage. But we were there.
Yeah. Who was the designer?
Huh? It was the work we did at floating information out and prioritizing it and creating action items based out of unstructured data.
Yes.
And boy, have we all gotten better at that since then. But we were there, dude. So just building on this, AI is going to kill low code, right? Because we'll just tell it what to build, and then an application will pop out the other end, right? This is a comment that John and Ryan and I deal with on a regular basis. We have our opinions, but we like to hear yours.
Yeah. One of my favorite inventions in the last few years is the work that's going on in touchless computing. And how, especially people with disabilities. I have a brother who's intellectually disabled. He doesn't quite need this kind of help, but I'm conscious of people with disabilities and how technology can help. Touchless computing, the original RFID that allowed some of the chess movements, the mouse movements. Now we have the woman who came down, I think she's in Montana, down to Stanford Medical, and was able, she's stroke victim. She's able to have an avatar speak for her. I mean, the touchless computing space, a little bit different in your question, is amazing. What's behind a lot of all of this technology, is the interface from a friendly, a consumable interaction to a lot of architecture and a lot of complexity that makes things get your desired outcome. So, it's an interesting question. Will AI destroy or eat or no code? But I almost feel like I haven't heard that question directly until now. But my initial reaction is, even if you have voice activated touchless interfaces into directing your environment, you still need to translate that into the architecture. You need a model. You need something that's going. And so it almost feels like there's a nice synergy there. There's a nice build on rather than a replacement. But I don't know. What are you guys hearing on that?
We're hearing a great deal of commonality from people who actually have been involved in software development. And it's very similar to what you just said, right? Which is, you can build something, you could react to it, you can finish it. You might end up with a much more interesting starting point. You might end up with multiple acceleration points in the process. But if we're really getting to this long tail, I thought Nick Ford did a fantastic job of answering this question, John, of the fact that, that the visual metaphor is incredibly important to software development, certainly to iterating and finishing the software development. But yeah, there'll be a lot of accelerators, but kill it. Not this year, right? Not in the foreseeable future. In my humble opinion,
honestly, I mean, I'm old and decrepit, so I don't even think it's going to happen in my lifetime. I don't know how many years I have left, but there's so much opportunity that you actually can observe in the platforms and the tools out there of using generative AI. As Rob, I love the term accelerator, to accelerate a definition process or a definition of a model.
Yeah.
But there's a human there, and you're helping the human being complete this piece of software, this automation project.
And there's
Maybe years and years out,
and there's two lanes, and I think
it'll
we
take over.
sometimes
But
I think we sometimes confuse them, or maybe people that are not building a lot of software, haven't been involved in building software, confuse them. So the other area where we see a lot of common thinking on this, I was at Appian World this week. I loved how Matt Culkin put it. I was doing some work with Jesse Shia of AgilePoint yesterday. And this concept that says there are just a huge number of services that are coming to bear, which can do something incredibly well. We're familiar with it. Like, we've always used external credit assessments. We've used external things for things like fraud detection. I mean, certainly, Kramer, in the content intelligence, we've always tapped into those things times 1,000, right? These services that will come up that will be incredible, right? They're going to show up around healthcare. They're going to show up around insurance. They're going to show up around, and they'll be very specialized. But the idea of consuming them as separate little pieces of technology, that's great. That's better than a sharp stick in the eye. But consuming them into a process, consuming them into how you run your business, starts to get us back into modeling and orchestration and being able to swap these things in and out. I think that's incredibly important for the market to understand.
Yeah, I don't feel like we're too far away. We're there now in certain environments to verbally create a model based on participants, sequencing, and deliverable. And to a certain degree, time is where we added that extra area. If that can accelerate the creation of the model through, verbal interaction, and as long as you can do a check, and that'll save time. I mean, the whole point that we're on, and John, you had an interesting point in one of the podcasts. You're talking about labor, and you said that labor is one of the key drivers for adoption of low code and no code platforms. And I should say low code because I know Clay's not here, and you won that battle, so we'll say low code, right? Yeah, God bless Clay. I hope he's doing well. I need to say hi to him.
He's doing great.
Well,
he's doing great.
Good.
He'll be on soon enough. He'll be on soon enough.
Good. You said something about labor, and I thought that was an interesting point, and I wanted to bridge that to what I'm hearing, which is speed. And there's an element of the labor that is an inhibitor, whether or not it's the assignment of the labor, whether or not it's a manager knowing if the resource is available, appropriate, skilled, and has the experience. Or can that be automated, where that's one of the things we do is automatic resource assignment and prioritization.
Right.
But speed is really what and speed is one of the key drivers. So if AI can reduce the time to objective by 5% to 50 to 90%, even if it doesn't get to 99.5 accuracy,
absolutely,
I'm confident of that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, labor's another topic that we'll have to tackle. So Bureau of Labor Statistics has some really interesting findings. Just looking at it the other day, and anyway, that's another.
Yeah,
that's another day.
I love their source. I've always, one of the things I always quote is, why has the productivity growth rate declined consistently over 40 years? And there's some interesting things about, Tom Friedman rolled his flat stuff, some of that, disparity in income and things. But there's a lot. We should have another discussion. I'll take this hat off and put my economist hat on.
We'll bring Andy. We'll bring our friend Andy Bartels to that discussion, because he's all over that.
His very favorite topic. Oh yeah, he would love to dig into that topic. So guys, we kind of let the audience know that the nature of this dynamic might run long, and we did. But I loved the conversation. Thank you so much for coming on, Kramer. We really appreciate it. Thanks, John, for
Thank
co-hosting.
you, Kramer.
Thanks everybody for
Thanks
for
thanks for this, Rob. This is great. Yeah.
yeah,
And to
yeah.
Ryan
No,
too.
we're having a
Yeah.
ball, and hopefully we're providing
Yeah.
some value out there. People keep approaching us and saying, there's value in the podcast. It's like, great. So listen, thank you everybody else for joining. We'll see you next week with another episode of Lowdown on Low Code.
All right, I got to finish up with my Giants hat. Go Giants.
Go Giants.
Thanks, everybody.
Ryan.
Thanks, John. Okay.
All right. Bye, guys.
See you guys.